Hello, this video is a brief introduction to Windows Form applications and Visual Studio IDE, which is going to be used for designing and implementing different WinForm applications. Here is the overview of the lecture. First, I'm going to show you a simple example of Windows Form applications, and then after that, I'm going to show how to add a button to an empty form. And then we're going to see how to subscribe to an event, like clicking on a button in C#. Then I will introduce design customization of a form in Visual Studio IDE. And then finally, we're going to take a look at how to arrange controls over a form in WinForm applications. This is a super simple example of a WinForm application. Let's say you have a simple program with a simple main function that you see here, and inside that I'm calling the show function of MessageBox, and I pass hello comma Windows Forms. MessageBox is a class written within the system Windows Forms namespace. It's already there, you don't need to implement it. And when I run this program, it shows this window which says hello comma Windows Forms exclamation mark. After you press OK, it's going to disappear. Now let's write another application that displays a generic form which can contain anything because a message box is too simple and it only carries a single message, and it doesn't give us any flexibility to implement interesting applications. This is the second attempt of writing a Windows Form application. As you see in the main function or main method, I have created an instance of form class, which is again defined inside system Windows Forms namespace, and then I will say Form.Show. I call the show method of form. When you write this program and run it, you will see that an empty form like this appears for a very brief period of time, a very short period of time, and then it disappears. Why? Because this show will return the control back to the main method, and the main method does not wait for this show to be ended by the user. The main will reach to the last line and it terminates the whole program. That's why the form that is shown on the display will go away. You can try it. This show method basically displays forms in a modeless fashion. Modeless means that when the form is displayed, other activities can take place concurrently. So this is more reasonably used when you have multiple forms and you want to show one form in a modeless fashion so that the user can still interact with other forms in the same application. When you have only one form in an application, creating a modeless form doesn't make sense. As I said, if you run this program, it shows a form for a very short period of time, and then the form will disappear and it doesn't look good. It's not helpful or meaningful program. All right, so the major issue with the previous attempt was the form was shown in a modeless fashion. Let's use a different function or different method of the form class, and that's called the ShowDialog method. And this one displays the form in a modal fashion. What does that mean? That means when you call this method, the control of the program will not return back to the main function until the form has closed. So that means the form that is shown modally using the show dialog will get the whole attention of the UI thread, and it doesn't let the user to interact with any other form in the application unless the user closes the current form. Well, this is better than the previous attempt, but this is not what we want. Why? Because when you create a form this way using Form.ShowDialog, the form is not accessible from other parts of your application, so that's not the best way to create an application. Now, as the third attempt to create a new WinForm application, let's try this. Let's use the Application.Run static method, which receives a form object. You can first create a new form object, and then you can pass that form to the Application.Run. And this way, your program starts by displaying this form in a modal fashion, and then your application continues running until the user decides to close the form. When the form is closed, the application will exit, right? And the application class and application.run method are all inside the system Windows form namespace. That's the method that we generally use to create new Windows Form applications. Before passing the form object to the application.run, what you can do is to customize different properties of the form class. For example, you can say form.text is equal to hello world Windows Forms, and then you can pass it to the application.run. And when you run this application, you will see hello Windows Form exclamation mark in the caption of your form. Instead of passing an object of the form class to the application run method, what we can do is we can take advantage of inheritance in C# and pass a child object of the form class to the application.run. What's the benefit of doing this? In this example, as you see, I'm passing an object of my first form class to the application.run, and I define my first form as a subclass of the form class. So my form class derives form class, and because of the inheritance, my first form is a form, so it's okay to pass it to the application.run method. And within this class, what I'm going to do is I can do whatever customization I want to do to the form. For example, inside the constructor, as you see, I'm setting the text to hello Windows Forms. So if you run this program, you're going to get the same exact outcome as you get when you're running the program in the previous slide. Now let's see how we can add a new button on this form without using the visual designer of Visual Studio. I just want to only use C# code to add a button on the form. I don't want to use any visual designer help. So to do this, I have to first write down the constructor of my first form, which is a subclass of the form class. And then inside that constructor, you can initialize the text to, for example, hello Windows Forms. And then you can create a new button. That's a new button object called, let's call it button. And then button.text is click me. That means, your button, when it appears on the screen, it has a click me label on it. And then I will do this, which means this form, dot controls, which is basically a collection of all controls on this form, dot add button. So this is going this line is going to add the button on the form, and that's exactly what we were looking for. Merely adding a button on a form doesn't help at all. You have to handle the events that can be triggered using this button. The most commonly used event for the button is the click event. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's do button.click plus equal new event handler, and then I pass the name of a function to it. This plus equal is called a subscribe operator, which subscribes uh, to an event. So basically, by doing plus equal and a new event handler, you're subscribing to an event. That means whenever the button is clicked, we're gonna call an event handler. What's the name of the event handler? It's called button click. So button click is a special method which returns no output, and it gets two input parameters, an object sender, an event args e, and basically it runs a piece of code whenever you click on a button. So in the event handler of button click, what I do is I will say, let's call the show method of MessageBox. So we say MessageBox.Show, and then we're gonna write down a message on the screen. That's a strong, confident click you've got. And as you see, when I click on this button, this window pops up and it shows you the same message that you passed to the show method of MessageBox class. Now, instead of creating a new event handler, uh, we can use a special syntax in C# to create a delegate, and then use delegate to create an event handler for your event. In this case, we are going to create an event handler for click event of the button object. So we say button.click plus equal, instead of saying let's add a new event handler, we can simply say a delegate in parentheses object O comma event args E. If you remember, that was basically the same signature as the method that we pass to the constructor of an event handler. And then in the body of the body definition, in the definition of the delegate, the body, which should be enclosed in curly braces, what we write is what we are going to run whenever the click event is triggered. So all I want to do here is to show a message box saying that there is a delegate on the button.text, and click me in this case. So you can test this and you can see that this syntax works as well. So it's up to you, whichever you want to use. We're going to see more about delegates in the future. Now, let's have a combination of the two previous approaches. I told you you can handle an event by creating a new event handler and subscribe to the event using plus equal, using that event handler. Also, I showed you how to do it with a delegate. So now in this example, I can say, the button.click event, we are going to subscribe to it using a new event handler plus a new delegate, or a delegate that shows this message. So this is going to create a chain of event handlers for that event. So whenever we click on the button, first this event handler is going to be executed, the button click method, and after that, after this button click method returns, a message box is going to appear on the screen, and it's going to show you delegate on click me button, right? All right, so now let's take a quick look at how to use Visual Studio to create a new Windows form. When Visual Studio starts up, you can search for a new project. You can search for Windows Form applications. We care more about the first choice here, the Windows Form App, which is basically a nice empty template for Windows application projects. And also another template that we care about is Windows Form Control Library, which we will use it later for one of the lectures. That's going to create a library of custom controls of forms for the purpose of reusing in different WinForm applications. When you create a project using the Windows Form application template in Visual Studio, the project will contain a few C# source codes, unless you have selected a different language. But the correct language, you need to select the C#, and if you do that, you will have these predefined classes, or I should say predefined files. Program.cs is a class that contains the main function or the main method, and it has a few other things like this is the thread, which is needed for inter-process communication of Windows operating system. You should not touch any part of your program class. It's better not to touch it. I mean, you can touch it, but it's better not to touch it. You can keep it in the same way that appears in the template. Another thing that you can find inside a new empty Windows Form App project is an empty form inside Form.1.cs. There should be a design wording within a bracket in front of that Form.1.cs. If you click on that window, if you open that window, you will see a empty form with the Form1 caption and this nice icon, which you can change them if you want, and you can edit this form. You can change the size, you can change the transparency, you can change the text, you can change the back color, you can use the toolbox which appears on the left hand side, or if it doesn't appear, you can make it appear by going to the menus and make the Visual Studio show you the toolbox. You can use that toolbox to drag different control objects and drop them on this empty form. You can drag a button, you can drag checkboxes, you can drag panels, you can drag radio buttons, and many other control objects that I will explain as we go forward in the future. If you're curious about what's inside Form1.cs and you want to know what's the C# code that generates your Form1, you can press F7 key on Form1.cs when you're selecting Form1.cs in the Project Explorer, or you can right click on Form1.cs design, and so when you right click on Form1.cs design, you can pick the view code, and then you will see this. In this one, in this file, you will see parts of Form1, which is a class, subclass of the Form class. You will see the constructor of Form1, which calls initialize component, which is a method implemented by the designer of Visual Studio. So whatever operation you do within your Form1.cs design window will cause some code to be generated within initialize component method. Now again, if you're curious to see what's inside initialize component method, you can go to this form1.designer.cs file, which is another file that can be found in an empty new Windows Form application project. And inside that, you can see this line which says Windows Form Designer generated code. You can open it, you can expand it by clicking on this, and basically it will show you the implementation of initialize component method. Before showing you the initialize component method, it says require method for design support. Do not modify the contents of this method with the code editor. So take this warning seriously, because if you change it, then you will not be able to see the design window anymore, because the Visual Studio realizes that it has inconsistent code with the design tray, and then that's why it doesn't let you see the design window visually anymore. So do not modify the content of this method using the code editor. However, whatever change you do on the design tray in a visual fashion will cause a single line or a few lines of code within this initialize component method. For example, by moving the object around, you're gonna change the location, and the location appears within this form. Or when you change the text will appear in this code. So you can observe it, you can read it, but do not manipulate it. Here is an example of a code generated automatically by Visual Studio after you drag a button from Toolbox and drop it on a form. So as you see, it specifies this location as 205 and 75. These are pixels. It shows the exact location of the button on the screen, on the form, I should say. And if you drop the button at a different location, you will get a different point, different location here in the code. And then it shows you the size, again, the number of pixels horizontally and vertically specifies the size, and then the name of the button, the text that labels the button, the tab index, which I'll explain later what it means, and a few other properties that can be set. And also this the act of dragging a button and dropping it on a toolbox will make Visual Studio to write down this line inside Form.1, so that we can add the button to the controls collection of the form that you're designing. Finally, I just wanted to mention that any object that you have in the design tray, either the form or the control objects like the button that you add to the form, can be customized using Visual Studio. So when you click on, let's say, the button that you add, you will see on the top right the list of properties for that button that you can change them very conveniently by just clicking on the current value and changing it by picking, let's say, another menu in a drop-down menu or another item in the drop-down menu. For example, I can just go to the back color properties of button 1 and change the color from control to any other color I want by just choosing another color in the drop-down menu. Or I can change the fore color, or I can change the tab index, or I can change the text alignment from middle center to left aligned or right aligned. I can change the text, which is basically the caption of the text, and I can change whatever I want, right? I can change the cursor. Whenever cursor goes on the button, I can change it from default to any other shape I want. And also, not only I can change these properties, I can also go to the actions. I can click on this shape, and then it shows me all the events. As I told you, click is the most commonly used one, but there are many other events that I can handle for the button, and I can just create event handlers conveniently using this list. I can create an event handler for whatever event I want. There are many events as you see listed here. Also, I can do the same thing for the form itself. If I click on the form top narrow strip, I can select the form in the design tray of the Visual Studio, and then on the bottom right I can see the properties of the form, like the text of the form, the full color, the back color. I can click on this again, this small button, and then I can see I can see the list of all the events that can be handled for the form, like click, double click, paint. We're gonna talk about these events in the future.